Good evening and Happy New Year. It's Wednesday, January 1st. I'm Maya Trabulsi. Tonight, we have a special look back at the top stories of 2019. And we start with one that will continue to play out in 2020. One of the biggest stories of the year was the case against Duncan Hunter. A sudden guilty plea to misusing campaign money brought his career in Congress to an end. KPBS reporter Matt Hoffman was there.
Made mistakes, and that's what today was all about.
Pleading guilty, a major reversal for the congressman who has maintained he's innocent.
And the indictment is all they have. They only have what you've now seen. That's it. I've done nothing wrong, and I say bring the trial now.
But by making a deal with federal prosecutors, Hunter stopped that from happening.
Obviously, they made a right turn.
Former U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of California, Chuck LaBella, is surprised Hunter struck a deal.
Sometimes they have a change of heart. They say, okay, I see now what the government is saying.
Hunter says he does not want a public trial in order to protect his kids.
Someone does something, takes responsibility for criminal conduct, because they don't want to put their family through the stress and the trauma of a trial. That's real. That's not fake.
Hunter was indicted last year on 60 counts. He agreed to plead guilty to the main one of conspiring to misuse campaign funds, which carries a maximum 5-year sentence and a $250,000 fine. If Hunter resigns his 50th congressional seat before sentencing, LaBella says it could help him.
If I was a defense lawyer, I would argue that, look, that's part of the punishment, Judge, you should consider. He's now left office.
Prosecutors did indicate they would seek over a year behind bars. Hunter could avoid prison altogether, though, but LaBella says that's a slim chance.
Yes, it's possible that he'll get probation, and yes, it's conceivable that he could get 5 years in jail. Both those things are conceivably possible. I think the more likely result is that there is going to be a disposition by the judge that gives him a period of incarceration.
Ms. Hunter, have you had a chance to talk to your husband?
In June, Hunter's wife, Margaret, took a deal, pleading guilty to the same charge.
Her cooperation clearly led to his plea of guilty. Without her cooperating, I think there would be a strong possibility of his going to trial. I think she'll get a probationary period. She's not going to serve any period of incarceration.
Will you be seeking a pardon?
Hunter is a big supporter of President Trump, and LaBella says you can't rule out the potential for a pardon. No word on that, but if it did happen, it would likely come after his sentencing in March. Matt Hoffman, KPBS News.
The 50th District isn't the only part of San Diego that will elect a new member of Congress this year. Representative Susan Davis is also on her way out. In September, the Democratic Congresswoman announced she would not seek re-election. She served since 2001 in a district that covers parts of downtown San Diego, East County, and South Bay. UCSD professor Tom Wong and San Diego City Council member Georgette Gomez are among those running for the seat in 2020. And of course, 2020 is a presidential election year. President Trump is facing re-election amid an impeachment scandal. And in September, his campaign made a stop in San Diego.
So we are flying the giant baby balloon, Trump baby balloon, to protest the Trump's administration's policies. And many of these policies range from just kind of childish to just downright evil.
And I think what Republicans in this state should take note of is that this means even though we are a blue state, he has not forgotten about Republicans in California.
And that was just some of the scene downtown near the U.S. Grant Hotel, where he held a fundraising event. It was Trump's second trip to San Diego as president. While in town, the president also visited the border wall, which remains the centerpiece of his controversial immigration policies. KPBS reporter Max Rivlin-Nadler had that part of the story.
After meeting with donors downtown, Trump came here to Otay Mesa to view a recently reconstructed portion of border fence. This section is part of 14 miles of reconstructed fence stretching all the way from the ocean to here in Otay Mesa. Trump's last visit to Otay Mesa was in March 2018 to review prototypes for possible border walls. Those prototypes were knocked down earlier this year to build the replacement fence. none of the prototype designs were chosen by DHS to be used as part of the replacement fence. On his way to Otay Mesa today, Trump tweeted an announcement in English and rough Spanish that there would be no more illegal entry into the United States, featuring himself and the backdrop of the border fence. In Otay Mesa, Trump said that Mexico was still actually paying for the wall because it has invested in its own manned border security.
The president of Mexico has been great. The soldiers who are right outside, we have a lot of soldiers right now, they've been great.
He also signed the wall along with construction workers. This completed Trump's two-day visit to California, which focused on fundraising for his re-election campaign. Here at Otay Mesa, Max Rivlin-Nadler, KPBS News.
Poway was one of the communities shattered by gun violence in 2019. In April, worshippers at the Chabad of Poway were observing Passover when a shooter barged in and opened fire. 60-year-old Lori Kay was killed. 3 others were hurt, including Rabbi Israel Goldstein. Months later, he decided to step down from day-to-day duties, partly due to the mental toll from the shooting. In the weeks after the shooting, KPBS investigated the online subculture that law enforcement says may have played a role. Here's our story from KPBS reporter Priya Sridhar.
On the last day of Passover celebrations, a gunman entered this synagogue in Poway, opened fire, killing one 60-year-old congregant and injuring 3 others. According to authorities, the suspect, 19-year-old John Ernest, had no criminal record and no prior interactions with law enforcement.
We're collecting digital evidence, and we're aware of his manifesto, which we're in the process of reviewing to determine its validity and authenticity.
That manifesto was reportedly posted on an online message board called 8chan. It's the same website that was allegedly used by a suspect charged with murdering 50 people at 2 mosques in New Zealand in March. The site welcomes users to the, quote, darkest reaches of the internet and promotes free speech above all else.
We're talking about individuals who are self-radicalized through the internet.
Daryl Foxworth is a retired FBI special agent with 30 years of experience.
Now, how does that occur? Through a number of ways. I mean, they go on the internet, they identify chat rooms, social media sites, things of that nature, and they start, ingesting this, digesting this internally, and then they find some reason to identify with these groups and take violent actions against others.
He says federal law enforcement agents will sometimes monitor chat rooms when they're involved in specific investigations.
Everything that they do, it's going to be done based on the law. They're not going to break the law to enforce it. So you're going to make sure that you have a court order or some lawful authority that's going to allow you to do that.
Because the internet is vast, that monitoring usually happens at the federal level. And when a specific threat is identified, the agency involved in the investigation will pass that information on to their regional field offices, who will then work in cooperation with a local law enforcement agency. Lieutenant Sean Takeuchi is with the San Diego Police Department.
In terms of internet and monitoring the internet, that's something very, very difficult to do because, again, that credibility has to exist. And so oftentimes we rely on our federal partners for that. With the internet, we don't know where that information is coming from. If the threat's being made in another state and it's coming across state lines, well, that's going to be very, very difficult for us to investigate.
He says another challenge is identifying whether a threat on the internet is criminal and credible, or if it could be protected by freedom of speech.
We have the Bill of Rights. We have the First Amendment and freedom of speech. So in this country, we have the ability to say things that we want to say without fear of prosecution, without fear of government intervention.
According to the California Penal Code, a criminal threat is defined as a willful threat to commit a crime that will result in death or bodily injury to another person. The threat can be made in writing, verbally, or by electronic communication. Today, those threats have become even more difficult to track thanks to encryption services and private chat rooms. Mark Heckman is a cybersecurity professor at the University of San Diego.
As new tools are developed, the governments or law enforcement comes up with countermeasures, which forces the development of new measures, and that's never ending. And I don't see that we'll ever have the last word on that. It's very difficult to stay up on what's new, on the latest thing that's happening. any tool that can be used for good could also be used for evil.
He says trying to find a balance between monitoring the internet and maintaining privacy is an ongoing debate.
We're right on the boundary between privacy and security, and perfect privacy and perfect security are, I think, both impossible.
Federal authorities have charged the suspect in the Poway shootings with 109 counts of hate crimes. That includes setting fire to a mosque in Escondido. He also faces state charges of murder and attempted murder. Priya Sridhar, KPBS News.
The past year brought a surge in activism when it comes to our changing climate. Much of that was led by a 16-year-old girl from Sweden. Greta Thunberg was named Time's Person of the Year for her work, which included an angry speech given at the United Nations. Young people also raised their voice in San Diego, and in September they hit the streets.
We want climate justice. When do we want it? Now!
The global climate strike featured mass walkouts led by students around the world. This video shows students from San Diego High School. A recent UN climate report shows countries around the world have done little to slow emissions that are leading to rising global temperatures. Climate change is an environmental story and a political story, and one local congressman found that out when activists staged a sit-in at his local office. Here's KPBS reporter Eric Anderson.
Scott Peters needs to sign the pledge. Scott Peters needs to co-sponsor the Green New Deal, H.R. 109.
The protest began in the courtyard of the La Jolla building that houses the congressman's office. Megaphones, whistling, and chanting disrupted the normally sedate building, and the protesters occupied the congressman's office.
Scott Peters! Step aside!
The activists are trying to convince Peters to support the Green New Deal. That's a sweeping policy initiative that attempts to curb carbon emissions and overhaul the way the nation's economy works.
We're calling on Representative Scott Peters to...
Protester Peter Sloan says the group wants to raise the alarm about climate change.
We're in a planetary emergency, and the science has been known for decades, but our political leaders just aren't acting on it, and it's time for them to really step up or step aside.
Peters hasn't shown much flexibility on the issue. In an August interview with KPBS, the lawmaker said he didn't agree with the Green New Deal because it's too broad and doesn't contain any actual legislation.
I don't think it's bold, and I don't think it's action. Look, I totally support the enthusiasm that it's brought. I'm really happy to see that voters appear to be interested in what I've been interested in for 20 years, which is climate action, and they're taking votes based on that. But the Green New Deal is not bold in that it doesn't bring anybody else in.
We are raising the alarm.
Peters says he doesn't support including free education or guaranteed job proposals in a climate action measure. He argues those items should be debated separately.
There's such a limited time to take action on climate change. And
Masada Diesenhaus is the director of San Diego 350.
We will continue to try and convince Scott Peters and our other elected officials that we really need bold, comprehensive action on climate change.
The protest ended without any arrests, even though almost a dozen people say they were prepared to go to jail. Eric Anderson, KPBS News.
San Diego has its own climate action plan, but the past year brought new obstacles in reaching our goals. KPBS Metro reporter Andrew Bowen explains how local efforts can only go so far.
So we'll just do glass in one.
Okay.
And cans in the other.
I'm standing with Ian Monahan at the Miramar Recycling Center. We're dumping bags of recyclables into sorting bins. Should have brought some gloves myself.
I got some for you.
Oh, really? That would be helpful. Okay. Monahan works for I Love a Clean San Diego. The nonprofit collected these bottles and cans at a weekend cleanup in Mission Bay. We take the bins to a scale, then staff give Monahan a receipt worth
$26.58.
Not bad.
Not bad.
Just a few months ago, the Miramar Recycling Center was on the verge of closing. China used to be a major market for America's recyclables, but last year the country started restricting the types of materials it accepts. This has been a huge blow to the operators of Miramar and to the city's climate action plan. That plan counts on keeping more waste out of landfills to reduce emissions of methane, a potent greenhouse gas. The The center stayed open only because of a bailout approved by the city council in June. Now it's being subsidized by taxpayer dollars. Monahan says China's decision has disrupted the global recycling economy.
When we have disruptions like this, it really begs the question as to how are we conserving? We need to look at our behavior and what we're doing here at home to conserve and quite honestly reduce.
That's a perfect example of outside factors and market dynamics and international politics that's influencing what we're trying to do locally.
Cody Hooven is San Diego's sustainability director. It's not just Beijing that's impacting San Diego's climate goals, it's also Washington and Sacramento. As we flip through a copy of the city's climate action plan, we land on a page with some pie charts. They show more than 2/3 of the city's emissions reductions are expected to come from state and federal policies, like electric vehicle incentives or tougher fuel efficiency standards. But those things aren't a slam dunk, facing challenges from the Trump administration. Hooven says the city is watching.
When stuff like that changes, when the federal administration tries to reverse the state action and then the state files a lawsuit against the federal action, those are years processes. So we track them and we try to understand what would our position be or how we can influence them. I guess we try to cross that bridge when we come to it.
But here's a very important point about San Diego's climate action plan. The city can and will get outside help with cutting emissions. But if that outside help falls short, the city is still on the hook for cutting in half its carbon footprint. Nicole Capritz of the nonprofit Climate Action Campaign says state policies have helped with renewable energy, but they're failing to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from transportation. A report earlier this month found car travel in California is going up.
Which means that will blow the opportunity and the ability for us to reach state climate goals. So it's really going to be imperative that the mayor and the council and all local governments sort of take matters into their own hands and figure out what can they do locally and regionally to make us climate safe and climate ready.
Capritz says all the data and science is showing the climate crisis is accelerating and that the city and state need to go completely carbon neutral by 2045.
That means a really fundamental radical shift in how we do almost everything. And so we're going to want to see us taking it to that next level because, again, it's all about protecting public health, achieving clean air, and making sure we're doing right by the next generation.
Back at the Miramar Recycling Center, Ian Monahan says San Diego has promised to fight climate change, with or without help from the state or federal governments. Put simply,
we have an aggressive climate action plan. We're going to have to find a way to meet those goals.
Andrew Bowen, KPBS News.
KPBS News featured a special week of climate change coverage in September, but this is a story we're committed to covering year-round. You can find more at the KPBS Climate Change Desk at kpbs.org. The cost of living keeps rising in San Diego, and it was no different in 2019. Affordability dominates so many parts of our day-to-day life. That's why KPBS is part of a public media collaboration called The California Dream that tackles this major issue. Part of our coverage included this piece from KPBS reporter Amitha Sharma.
This is where I sleep. And usually I start getting ready to go to sleep about 8:30 at night.
After a night sitting up against the front of San Diego's Senior Wellness Center, he's stiff.
And this is my problem right here, trying to get up with two bad knees. I had 2 surgeries, 2 knees replacements, 2 hips, and being cold all night doesn't help it.
He says he spends most of the night winking and blinking.
Can't sleep solid because I don't want to get my throat cut. I lost a friend out here who got stabbed to death.
He points to his cane, his only defense. Then he walks 8 blocks through other homeless encampments to a nearby deli to use the bathroom.
Sammy, remember I told you that movie I was making?
Carl seems to know everybody here. He's in his element.
And this is a nice guy. He feeds me, he gives me a cup of coffee, and let me put the lottery when I got $1.
Most days, he gets on the bus.
It comes my 2:15. Going to me.
So you're getting on the bus now. What are you going to do?
Usually I get on the bus, I go to sleep.
He takes the bus back to the Senior Wellness Center for lunch.
This is how it goes, except on Saturdays and Sundays.
Afterwards, he shares his deepest wish.
And I feel better inside of a place where I got a key where I can lock myself in at night. I don't like being out there in the street like that. And when it rained that last week, oh man, it was rough.
Carl says he wound up on the streets after the death of his second wife. He says he got booted from Section 8 housing for subletting to a felon.
And I didn't read the small print. I became homeless as of August 26, 2015.
Carl says he keeps trying to find a new place, but there are few options in California for relatively healthy homeless seniors.
Then I find out you got to be cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs to get in there. I'm not going to play crazy. I'm not crazy. I'm broke. I'm homeless.
There are days, he says, when this existence is overwhelming.
I've been up and down, but mostly up. I was explaining that when the weather's nice, my pain is not that bad. But when it's cold outside, I'm cold. And I've been living on the streets out here in front of this building a while. Money does not stretch 30 days when you only get 800.
He says he knows other homeless seniors who've killed themselves out of desperation.
You commit suicide, that's a coward's way out.
Carl is optimistic. He's working with a pro bono lawyer to try to convince the Teamsters Union he's entitled to a pension from his truck driving days. Meanwhile, he says he trudges along.
My plans are to continue to pray and hope.
On this day, Senior Wellness Center worker Tim Ruiz hands Russell a bag of food and new clothing and encouragement.
Hang in there, Carl, don't give up. I can't. My mother had 13 kids. I'm second to the oldest. Mama taught us how to survive.
Amita Sharma.
Thank you. I'll see you later. Take care.
KPBS News.
Public media stations in San Diego, Los Angeles, Sacramento, and the Bay Area are part of the California Dream collaboration. All of our stories can be found at kpbs.org/dream. It wouldn't be a year in review without a look back at some of the events that make San Diego one of the top travel destinations in the world. New in 2019 was the Wonderfront Music and Arts Festival in November. It's the first major music festival in downtown San Diego since Street Scene ended more than a decade ago. And of course, Comic-Con is the biggest draw. 2019 was the 50th year of the event. Organizers and the city have a new agreement to keep Comic-Con in San Diego through the year 2024. Gamers also took over the convention center in 2019. KPBS science and technology reporter Shalina Chatlani tells us why TwitchCon was such a big deal.
Oh, he gets the guard crush, but he doesn't get the follow-up.
It's Tuesday night at GameSync in Kearny Mesa. Video game enthusiasts are giving play-by-play of a heated round of a martial arts fighting game. They're in front of a computer, live streaming it out to fans on the web platform Twitch.
Comes down to this next game. Bragol, let us know. If you like Coda, let us know. Just cheer for your boys.
Over a dozen screens are lit up with at least 30 players in the room. On Thursday nights, a Smash Brothers Ultimate competition typically brings in over 100 people. While a few folks are providing color commentary, others are playing, having paid $5 to enter a competition for a cash prize. It's all part of a phenomenon known as eSports.
So eSports is, simply put, competitive gaming, and you can think of it as a traditional sport, but obviously it's all done with gaming systems online.
Agrigati Siegel is the owner of GameSync. He pivoted from working on computers to opening the center in 2012.
Think of our business like a movie theater. You go in on the weekend, everybody piles in, they buy their snacks and their drinks, and they pay for the film. Here, you're having an entertainment experience where you're buying time by the hour.
GameSync is still only one of a few gaming centers in the city, and he says he brings in a small profit. But he says he's also confident the local industry will grow, especially since global figures suggest that it will. At TwitchCon, I caught up with Zachary Snader of the esports analyst group Newzoo.
Esports is currently valued at over $1 billion if you account for all the revenues across the space right now.
Snader says even pessimistic forecasts show industry revenue will grow by 10% year over year. He says the West Coast is already a major hub of esports activity. And that's because the industry isn't just about gamers.
Everything from leagues that are run by the publishers that have professional teams. These teams have players associated with them. And there's all sorts of content that they create. That content and these leagues, these teams, there's all these different sponsorship elements as well.
There are also online content platforms like Twitch that are streaming the games, advertisers, consultants, company sponsors for teams, and the list goes on. much like a traditional sports ecosystem. And some professional players can win millions.
To give you an example of just how much money is involved here, we're at TwitchCon, and one of the Twitch Rivals competitions, a Fortnite competition, is about to take off again, and the prize tonight is $1 million.
So obviously it's not just small businesses like GameSync that are getting in on the game. I spoke to Convention Center CEO Clifford Ripto to hear his take on why it's such a no-brainer to invest in an event like this.
So TwitchCon is going to put us on the map technologically, similar to the way that Comic-Con has put us on the map internationally and as a brand.
Ripto says the Convention Center had to upgrade its technology to host TwitchCon. He says that investment will help it bring in other events demanding the same capability. And those events are also likely to bring in younger generations.
The ability for technology to not only create a business platform, but also a sport and entertainment platform is here. And it's going to stay from my point of view.
Ripto says TwitchCon is an example of how the esports industry can bring people who are willing to spend money into the city. And back at GameSync, it's clear just how the industry is doing that. Business owner Siegel says many esports teams from out of town are practicing at the center for TwitchCon.
I think what you see in San Diego is a lot of opportunity.
Already, there are a number of local college teams from schools like UC San Diego and major game publishers like Psyonix. But that's not enough for Siegel. He wants to expand, and it's still a challenge for him to find partners.
The biggest challenge to expand my business here in San Diego has been educating potential investors and partners and co-founders on the opportunities here.
Siegel says as the industry gets more attention through events like TwitchCon, it's just a matter of time for esports to go mainstream.
And if you can't already tell from the crowds of people around me, web streaming platforms like Twitch are becoming just as popular as YouTube and Netflix. Shalina Chatlani, KPBS News.
We hope you enjoyed this look back at our top stories of 2019. Thanks for joining us. And from all of us here at KPBS, have a Happy New Year.